Welcome back to America's Forum. Let's welcome in our friend Javier Manjarres of the Shark Tank political blog. The beard is gone. Did you shave that to go up to Capitol Hill last week?
No, actually, matter of fact, I shaved it the minute Senator Ted Cruz said I looked like Paul Bunyan.
So all it took was a remark from Ted Cruz. Would that have worked in the U.S. Senate to stop amnesty over the weekend?
No, but it had more to do with how much it itched, so I left it at that.
Oh, okay. It wasn't Ted Cruz alone. You know, no. Ted Cruz made news this weekend, in part because he angered his Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We heard Harry Reid and Dick Durbin badmouth him in the last segment. But as much as they badmouth him, and as much as the Washington establishment grinds their teeth, does that empower Ted Cruz? Is he the de facto head of the Tea Party?
I think he's the de facto head of the whole Republican caucus in the Senate. And people are looking up to him. I don't know if you saw the video that we shot with Ileana Ross-Layton where she praised Ted Cruz for being more bipartisan than what he's been given credit for. I mean, Republicans on the House side as well as the Senate are praising him for his work in the Senate. That speaks volumes.
Well, you mentioned Ileana, and she's on the other side of that immigration issue.
Right.
Ted Cruz actually talked with you about the subject of amnesty last week. Let's take a listen to how that went down.
President Obama's executive amnesty is astonishing and it's dangerous. You know, 6 weeks ago we had an election, and as the president rightly noted, his policies were on the ballot all over the country. We had a referendum on amnesty, and the American people overwhelmingly said no. We don't want amnesty. We want to respect the rule of law. We welcome, we embrace legal immigrants, those who follow the rules and come here seeking a better life, but we don't support amnesty. And then what the president's done is really remarkable. He came out of the election, not chastened that the American people have repudiated his agenda, but instead angry and defiant, and disregarding the views of the American people. Now listen, amnesty for 5 million people who are here illegally is, number one, unfair. It's unfair to the millions of legal immigrants who follow the rules. It's, number two, unfair to the 92 million working age Americans right now who aren't working. We've got the lowest labor force participation since 1978, and the Obama administration, instead of fighting for jobs for people who are out of work, is printing up work authorizations directly contrary to federal law to 5 million people who are here illegally. And number three, it's particularly harmful in the African American community. The African American community is facing historic levels of unemployment, and unfortunately this administration is not acting to create an environment for economic growth. Instead, it's issuing work authorizations for people here illegally. But I'll tell you, Javier, even more dangerous than the underlying substance of the amnesty is how this was done. The president's executive amnesty is flat out lawless. It is unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the president the authority to ignore federal law, to unilaterally change it. You know, actually, I think nothing summed it up better than the opening skit of Saturday Night Live, right after this was announced, where they had, you remember Schoolhouse Rock, where they had, how a bill becomes a law? And it started with the bill coming up saying, I pass the House, I go to the Senate, and if I'm lucky, it gets signed by the president and become a law. And what happens? President Obama walks out to the steps of the Capitol and pushes the bill down the steps.
Like 4 times.
4 times. And out steps an executive order sitting there just smoking a cigarette and says, yeah, I'm an executive order. I just happened. Look, what's amazing, Saturday Night Live had it exactly right. And this is dangerous. Listen, if the President of the United States can ignore federal immigration law, can rewrite it, we are undermining the constitutional protections of this country, and that's not theoretical. I mean, 2 centuries ago, the framers of this country fought a revolution against a monarchy. We've seen when one individual has unlimited authority to make the law, to change the law unilaterally, that's called a monarchy. I mean, it is a system of government. There are nations on earth today that have monarchies. Our nation was founded when we fought a revolution against a monarchy. And the Constitution was written because we didn't want the president to have the authority to just decree what law was. We wanted the president to follow the Schoolhouse Rock procedure, to go through the House, through the Senate, through, part of it is to do that takes compromise. And this president doesn't compromise. He doesn't believe in it. He decrees what he wants, and if the American people don't simply roll over and give it to him, then he's trying to decree it unilaterally. And if this president can do that, there's nothing to stop the next president from using the same prosecutorial discretion to refuse to enforce our tax laws or our labor laws or our environmental laws. And in my view, in face of what the president is doing, we're facing a constitutional crisis. And it is incumbent on Congress to stand up and use every constitutional check and balance we have, every constitutional authority to rein in an out-of-control executive. You know, the framers in the Federalist Papers talked about the danger of an out-of-control executive. And the two most important that we should use are, number one, the incoming Senate Majority Leader should use the nomination and confirmation power and should say that in the 114th Congress, not a single presidential appointee will be confirmed, executive or judicial, other than for vital national security positions, unless and until the president stops this illegal amnesty. That is a direct constitutional power given the Senate. It's meant to be a check on executive authority, and the incoming Senate Majority Leader should use it. And then second, we should use the power of the purse. The most powerful check the Constitution gives Congress is the power over money, and we should fund the vast majority of the federal government. Nobody wants a government shutdown. But we should use the power of the purse on funding for the Department of Homeland Security to say no money being appropriated by Congress shall be used for implementing illegal executive amnesty. That's what we should do, and I hope very much we see Republicans stand up and do exactly that.
Well, Ted Cruz tried to get that done this weekend, but Republicans, including a lot of guys from the Gang of Eight, went the other way with the Democrats, and so that was frozen out. Now, waiting till the springtime. Javi, how much time did you get with Ted Cruz?
About 40 minutes.
Well, we're using quite a bit of it. We heard him there on amnesty. Coming up, we'll hear what Senator Cruz has to say about that CIA report and also about the ongoing investigation with Benghazi and possible 2016 Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, her involvement there. Of course, that brings us back to 2016 and what Ted Cruz may be up to. We'll talk to you about that as well. Javier Manjarres will stay with us here. Right now, we step aside for a Newsmax Now update. Back on America's Forum with a newly clean-shaven Javier Manjarres of the Shark Tank political blog. You told us at the outset it wasn't really Ted Cruz commenting on the beard. It was the itchiness.
Right. You know, believe it or not, women dug it. I mean, for the most part, but it just the itchiness just superseded that.
Well, we shan't. We'll talk about another kind of itch, the presidential variety. Right. But what's interesting to me is it seems that Senator Cruz, the public perception is he really doesn't mind what other senators of either party have to say about him or how they regard him in that institution where personal relationships are supposed to mean so much. Is that accurate?
Right. He doesn't care at all. I mean, he embraces the whole title of being a wacko-bird, as your friend John McCain once referred to him and Senator Rubio and Rand Paul. He embraces it. He loves it. He actually thrives on it.
And yet there are some areas where I would imagine there is broad agreement between the rank and file in the Republican Party, perhaps not with the aforementioned John McCain, but with most folks in the Republican Party, and that includes the whole notion of this recently released report from the Democrats serving as staffers for the Senate Intelligence Committee, what we call now in shorthand the Senate CIA report. Let's take a listen to what Senator Cruz had to say, and we'll get some more of your thoughts, Javi, on the other side.
Absolutely. This was a partisan, irresponsible, reckless report. And as a consequence of this report, the 6,000 pages blasting the U.S. intelligence agencies. And it's placed American lives in jeopardy across the globe. People are at risk because of this report. And you know, it's part of the pattern we've seen from President Obama and the Senate Democrats for a long time, that everything is George W. Bush's fault. That they want to blame everything on Bush. Listen, the Obama-Clinton foreign policy isn't working. The world is on fire right now. And they're looking to change the subject. They want to pile on to President Obama's predecessor. Now it's important, Javier, to make clear. Torture is wrong. period, the end, unambiguously. And for good reason, U.S. law prohibits torture. No civilized nation engages in torture. But this report wasn't about that. This report was about political blame shifting and finger pointing. And I'll tell you what, one of the most troubling consequences of this report is in the aftermath of 9/11, we saw allies across the world cooperate with the United States. Some who had been longtime traditional allies, others countries that had not previously worked closely with us. But we saw global cooperation in the fight on terror. This report names names, and it places those allies in very difficult situations. And I fear one of the most long-lasting consequences of this partisan Democratic report is we're going to find allies across the globe a lot less eager to work with us in terms of stopping and catching radical Islamic terrorists. I don't serve on the Intelligence Committee. I haven't seen the evidence one way or another. Civilized nations don't engage in torture. We need to be vigilant protecting this country, but torture is not necessary to get there. But this was not about changing our practices. The law was changed in 2006 to make clear that the United States would not engage in practices that could be characterized as torture. That was the right decision to do. This isn't about that. This is 8 years later, this is all about finger pointing because the Democrats want to distract from the failed Obama-Clinton foreign policy.
Said it twice there.
Yep.
I know he was talking about the report, but to my ears, what stood out, the description, the Obama-Clinton foreign policy.
He's been linking them together because, look, Hillary in 2016, she's supposed to be the heir apparent to the Republican presidential nomination, and he is considering a run.
Well, the curious thing to me is you say he's considering a run. I know everybody loves to leave their options open, but when you finished your close to an hour with him, when you walked out of there, did your political instincts tell you that, hey, here's a guy who's going to run in 2016?
Well, yeah, considering the fact that he's also writing a book, and most presidential candidates tend to release a book the year they announce for their presidency or any candidacy. Look, I'm releasing a book next year, but I'm not running for president. But he is, and I suspect that he is going to run for president, as will Senator Rubio and Jeb Bush.
And so you got that, and there's somebody else in the Senate you got to look at, and that's Rand Paul.
Right. He's also writing a book.
So it's kind of curious. I don't mean to get things going, but one can almost envision a scenario where you hear Ted Cruz talk about a Obama, Clinton, Rand Paul foreign policy. I know about the 11th Commandment and all that, but one could see that case being made. At any rate, more of your interview with Senator Cruz, specifically on Hillary Clinton and Benghazi, when we continue here on America's Forum. Continue our conversation with Javier Manjarres, the managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog and pretty good interviewer. As we continue to watch some excerpts of your interview with Ted Cruz. We were talking before the break, the whole labeling of Obama-Clinton foreign policy. It's not necessarily limited to those with presidential ambitions. This is pretty much going to be the GOP label for Mrs. Clinton and for the outgoing Obama administration heading into 2016 to link these people together and the failed policies together.
Well, I agree with anyone running for Senate or the House. They're going to be linked to Hillary Clinton. They're going to see how they supported Clinton in the past through her Senate campaign or maybe in 2008. And the GOP be smart to link them to because Hillary Clinton will run in 2016.
Well, perhaps there is no greater or more dramatic or more costly example of Hillary Clinton's involvement in our foreign policy as Secretary of State as to what happened in Benghazi. And that's a subject Javier brought up with Ted Cruz.
No, of course she hasn't. And I think it's terrific that she'll be testifying before the House. Trey Gowdy, I think, is an excellent chairman of that committee. I was very glad he was named to it. For over a year, I've been calling for the Senate to stand up and do our job as well. In my view, it should be a joint select committee, that the Senate should be engaging in oversight as well. I'm working with a number of colleagues here in the Senate, including Lindsey Graham, to try to press the Senate to do exactly that. And indeed, this past year, I had a resolution for a joint select committee to get to the bottom of what happened in Benghazi. We had 25 senators on board, but Harry Reid killed it and the Democrats wouldn't allow it to come to light. We need to discover what happened. We need to discover Number one, why the early warnings weren't heeded. We heard over and over again that our ambassador, our men and women were in jeopardy, and yet the State Department did nothing to protect them, did not act adequately. We need to understand, number two, why in the midst of the attack, we did not send in sufficient forces to protect the lives of the 4 brave men who died that day. We need to understand, number three, why the terrorists who committed those attacks haven't been brought to justice. It has been a long, long time, and we have not seen the vigilance that frankly, the President looked in the eyes of the American people and promised. And number four, we need to know why the administration, almost top to bottom, told the American people a story that they knew was false. Now, Hillary Clinton famously said, what difference does it make? When 4 brave Americans are murdered by terrorists overseas, it makes all the difference in the world, and we owe it to all the men and women who are serving this country, whether in the military, whether in our intelligence agencies, whether in the State Department, to make sure it doesn't happen again, to learn from these failures and put in place the steps to prevent this sort of tragedy and terrorist attack from recurring.
Do you think with the new Senate majority next year that your joint select committee could come to fruition?
I hope so. I don't know yet. I hope so. I am certainly urging that we do that. There are others who are urging the same thing. I would say at this point a decision hasn't been made, but I'm going to continue pressing it that I think the Senate, we need to do our job just like the House has been stepping up doing its job.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see, in fact, if that were to happen in the U.S. Senate. And I would imagine that some passions are running high in the wake of that Democrat report on the CIA. But is this a two-edged sword? Could Mr. Cruz and others get out so far in front on this that there'd be a backlash of sympathy for Hillary Clinton?
I think for the most part, they need to see what comes out of the select committee on Benghazi's in the House, with Trey Gowdy's chairing, and see what comes of that. If there's more to be divulged, as they think more to be divulged, I think they should do a select committee. But we'll wait and see. And it's all political, so depending on how where the political winds blow, you'll see something happen there.
Well, you cannot divorce politics from public policy, but again, despite the political opportunities that are here for 2016, it is tied to a very tragic and costly event in American history, with the death of an ambassador and 3 other Americans, and still a failure of accountability. Javier, you'll be back next hour to debate from a right-leaning perspective, and America's Forum will be back following this on Newsmax TV.